Well, and it certainly informs the cynicism, not only in politics, which I think is a national concern, but also about business in general. Are these people to be trusted? So if you're way down in the food chain and you're a young trader or a young banker or a young whatever, you are looking up all the time. We know that from all of our research. People look up. What do leaders need to do besides sort of walking around and being visible? How do they need to make visible their own true north so people can say, that's the kind of person I want to be, that's the sort of behavior I want to model?
Well, I think they have to talk about it to their employees. They have to make an example of good ethical behavior and bad ethical behavior. And they have to have, it's one of those things continuously, that requires continuous focus by CEOs and senior officers of any enterprise, whether it's an NGO, a not-for-profit, an educational institution. We've had lapses in educational institutions too.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
One of my favorite stories is about the university president out on the West Coast who was getting married on campus, and he asked some of his people to put the marriage expenses into their research budgets. It was a wonderful wedding, but it's slightly unethical to charge off his wedding expenses to government research projects.
Oops. Well, there are more and more, the more you begin to listen and the more you pay attention, those stories, fortunately or unfortunately, keep to be resurfacing with some frequency. When you were running State Street, you were running this huge 25,000 employee enterprise. How did you, as the CEO, share your vision about ethical behavior? What did you do? Did you write? Did you talk? Did you do all hands meetings? Did you travel the globe?
Well, we did all of those. All hands meetings were a little difficult. We had 11,000 people at our technology center alone.
Right.
But through written word and the spoken word, and we also would make examples of misconduct and say that this was unacceptable. I mean, without mentioning the names, because of the lawsuit, we would make examples of that.
The New York Stock Exchange has had its own challenges, and obviously you have been part of its recalibration, I guess. Looking at the exchange and now at the larger role at Euronext, what do you see from the particular perch you face now, looking at, for example, financial regulation? It's been so much in the subject, certainly in our current administration, where we've seen the economy go south. We've seen a lot of efforts to save the economy and to institute financial reform measures. We still are taking hostages and prisoners about whether that was the right thing to do. And in the last elections, certainly the current administration in part paid a price for what happened or didn't happen. Well, you sat in a very central role in this very visible exchange. What are you doing in that role, and how are you and your colleagues thinking about the issue of credibility, of confidence, of cohesion, so that everyone in that system feels like they're being treated fairly and being served well?
Well, there has been a real loss of confidence by the retail investor in the stock exchanges, us, NASDAQ, and about 50% of the trades are actually unregulated by the SEC.
Really?
Because of these high-frequency traders. And I think a lot of people feel like the stock exchange is just a big trading operation, which is partially true. But if you're a long-term investor, you shouldn't worry about the high-frequency traders and things like that, because they're the people that are going after the pennies between trades. And if you're a long-term investor for a college education, you're on a 10 or 15-year horizon. But we've had to completely restore the bylaws. We've separated the chairman from the CEO.
Oh, you have?
We did that the first time after the problems in the fall of 2003.
Right.
The entire 26-member board was fired, asked to resign, and we've done the corporate governance things that we had to do. And we replaced employees if there's any problem of unethical behavior.
What's the relationship between the NYSE and Euronext? What is Euronext? That's a new term for some of us in this room.
Well, Euronext was a company of public stock exchanges in Europe. Euronext owned the stock exchanges in Paris, Amsterdam, Brussels, Lisbon, and the derivatives exchange in London, not the London Stock Exchange. And they were a well-established public company that was put together in 2000. In 2006, the New York Stock Exchange and Euronext merged in a merger of equals.
I see.
And the new company, NYSE Euronext, is a Delaware company with an American CEO, but a European chairman. And the deputy CEO is European, and the deputy chairman, myself, is an American. So we've tried to bring together, we're still wrestling 3 or 4 years later with some of the cross-cultural issues, how people operate in the management structure, but we have a very, at the same time, we're changing the business model to offer, instead of just stocks, derivatives, and we have a technology company that helps establish stock exchanges in other countries.
How are you finding the cultural dance working between all of these elephants trying to learn to dance together?
Well, I think it takes a while. It takes, we've moved a lot of managers to Europe, Americans. We've moved Europeans to New York so that we have an intermeshing and an understanding of the culture. And I think in meetings for the mid-level managers, in a meeting, generally speaking, of Europeans and Americans, whoever's running the meeting has to figure out, is this a cultural issue that's happening? Is this person just misbehaving? Or is this person misbehaving regardless of the culture? So we have a lot of training through INSEAD, the business school in Paris, is helping us train our managers at 3 different levels on cross-cultural issues.
So you've taken on the task of engaging academic professionals and others to see this not only as a cultural change, but an opportunity for some leadership development.
Right, and I teach actually at the lower level, the first line managers up to the assistant vice president. I teach basic leadership techniques there. Is
this similar to what you do when you teach at MIT or at Harvard and all these different campuses that lure you to do television programs on Tuesday afternoon? And you've been here
Creighton,
before.
Yeah, last night we had a course, a 3-hour class in Creighton on leadership under adversity. So that's the kind of thing I like to do. I only really speak in academic institutions because then I can be free to say what I want.
Yes.
Without the
and we expect you to do that here today.
Right. Or if I have to fill in for the CEO or the chairman in some formal speech, but then somebody else, prepares that along the party line of the stock exchange.
What are the little surprises or bombs you drop along the way when you talk this way? What are the little secrets or the little shadows that you share with these students as you're doing today?
Well, I try to tell them through anecdotes the management principles that the professors don't know.
Oh, tell us.
Principle number 1 that Jacques Nasser found out when he was president of Ford is don't anger the guy whose name is on the building. And,
that's a very sound principle.
Number 2 that Jamie Dimon, the chairman of Morgan Chase, found out when he worked for Sandy Weill was regardless of how skillful the CEO's daughter is, do not fire them without checking with the CEO. So there are these little things that you learn in business that...
But they're more than survival skills. That's very smart.
There's no question about that. Yeah.
Well, an awful lot of what I think is so wonderful is that you bring what I can only call lore. You bring the hard-won truths from the battlefield literally into the classroom as you are here today, and we really appreciate that. But I really do think that audiences of every type are hungry to get sort of under the happy talk and say, for example, as I suppose they're doing at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, how do we reframe the agenda for the next 2 years? How do we re-engage not only a disparate Congress, but a dispirited populace? How do we get people back into the conversation about what's next? Because there's an amazing absence of optimism. Do you feel that hope
I really
is slipping
do.
away?
I wonder if the government and the current administration is tough enough. Now, you and I have talked before about my favorite definition of the federal government is the one from Herman Kahn, the famous futurologist. He defined the federal government as like 10,000 bugs on a log floating down the river. Each bug thinks he's steering the log. And there is a real problem, and just the recession is a good example. Most of the programs that Franklin Roosevelt put in, the WPA, the CCC, those were federally mandated programs run out of Washington. when they tried to do the stimulus money, it all went to the states. So, and I think the accountability is a real issue. I was very much in favor of the $25 billion for General Motors. But I didn't think the president completed the sentence, which was, I will give you $25 billion, General Motors, but I am today ordering 2 million cars for the non-military government. I want them delivered in 3 years, and I want them to get 50 miles per gallon. So there's no hooks on this money.
Right.
There was no hooks on the TARP money.
Right.
So, you know, he gave the TARP money to the banks. He should have said, I want to see this money going into middle market and below small business lending. He didn't say that. So I think we have to be a lot tougher. You and I talked the other day about Harry Truman.
Yes.
In the big railroad strike in '47, Harry Truman issued an executive order drafting every railroad worker into the Army. The strike was over in 6 hours. So, and the other thing he did in the 6 weeks before the '48 election, at the end of July '48, he called the Republican Congress off of vacation back to Washington to pass legislation. We don't see that kind of backbone in Washington today.